My name is Adrian Vale, and today I'm sharing the story of how one message from my own mother ended everything and began something greater. It's about control, silence, and learning that when they cut your wings, you don't fall. You fly your own way. Trust me, this one's worth every second. Before we start, tap subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Every comment reminds me that stories like this reach someone who needs to hear them. I was on my third flight in 3 days when it arrived. Subject line, your role is concluded. No greeting, no reason. Just those 4 words. Sent by Margaret Vale, my own mother and Chief Executive Officer of Nexus Systems. I stared at the screen while the cabin indicator blinked overhead. No one around me knew that. 33,000 feet up, my life had just been erased. Within seconds, my inbox cleared, my calendar vanished, and my SecureNet tunnel access was denied. 3 attempts, 3 instant rejections. I sat frozen between rows of strangers, the air hissing softly, the kind of silence that seems to watch you back. I didn't panic, not yet. What I felt was sharper, stunned silence. People imagine betrayal as loud, doors slamming, voices raised. Mine arrived wordless, sealed inside an email. I reached beneath the seat for my slim graphite laptop, the one invisible to Nexus's network. My private system, my Pulse. On its screen waited a folder marked Crescent Archive. Inside were blueprints, client records, encrypted contracts, everything tied to the Orion Cloud framework, the deal I'd built for 6 years and guarded for 9 months of travel. They could revoke credentials, but not creation. I opened a new file and typed a line that steadied me. When control cuts loyalty, respond with clarity. I wasn't falling. I was untethered. And when a rope is cut, you don't always drop. Sometimes you finally stop being dragged. Outside the window, the night stretched endless across the Dakota Plains. The engine hum felt like a metronome marking the end of one rhythm and the start of another. 2 moments replayed in my head: the compliance crisis 3 years ago and the data breach last spring. Both times. I'd saved Nexus from collapse. Both times my mother gave the credit to someone else. Loyalty, I learned, didn't count when bloodlines came before truth. I opened another window and drafted 3 encrypted messages. Each had the same subject. Access unlocked. I didn't send them. Not yet. Timing mattered more than anger. For the first time, the sky outside didn't look empty. It looked like a horizon. 6 weeks earlier, I'd been standing in a freezing data wing in Mesa, Arizona, watching a disaster unfold. Nexus's new server facility was supposed to impress a telecom partner with a flawless demo. I ran the back end while my stepbrother Lucas Vale, Director of Global Strategy, delivered the pitch up front. All charm, zero comprehension. 15 seconds in, he entered the wrong API key. Instead of launching a safe simulation, he activated a live test environment and streamed structured customer data onto every screen. It wasn't real, but real enough to cause panic. The room froze. The investors stared. Within an hour, local reporters were circling. By midnight, Law was scrambling and Lucas had vanished into his office. I stayed. I rewrote public statements, recorded architecture, and convinced 2 tech journalists to hold their stories. By dawn, the system was rebuilt, and the narrative reframed as a simulation stress test. The next morning's headlines praised Nexus for executing adaptive protocol under pressure. All my doing. Every fix. Every lie. A week later, the official report named Lucas Vale as stabilization lead. My name wasn't there. When I confronted my mother, she didn't even look up from her desk. In this family, she said evenly, what's ours is ours. She didn't see the theft. She saw tradition, the company and the family as one empire, all ownership flowing upward. That's when I stopped believing in inheritance. That night in a quiet Mesa hotel, I filled the first page of my cloth-bound journal and wrote a single line. Control endures through selective memory. If they could rewrite history, I would build a system where truth left a trace. So I began the framework that would one day save me, a transparent backup structure, legal and hidden in plain sight. I called it Helios Ridge. On paper, it was a small compliance LLC in Colorado, harmless. In reality, it was a mirror network, the place where memory couldn't be edited. I reached out to Ria Tan, a contract lawyer with the spine to face corporate storms, and Cal Wolf, the sharpest systems architect I'd ever known. Together, we wrote the first secure lines of code and hid them beneath layers of legitimacy. None of us said revenge. We called it insurance. Back on that flight, 33,000 feet over the Midwest, I realized Margaret might think she'd cut me loose. But the foundation under her empire had already shifted. Nexus Systems had erased my name from its ledgers. I'd already etched it somewhere they couldn't touch. For now, I sat quietly, watching the Riverton lights fade beneath the clouds and the dark stretch ahead like a new map waiting to be drawn, because they thought silence meant defeat. They didn't understand. Silence was the language of my revenge. We'll treat this as a procedural anomaly, not individual error. That was Margaret Vale's coded warning. Stay quiet for the family. I obeyed. Once more, and never again. That night in my Mesa hotel, I stopped pretending the system could be fixed from inside it. If the structure was built to erase me, no measure of loyalty would ever rewrite that code. So I began designing a new one. It started as a side protocol, a transparent legal framework for archiving volatile, multi-state deal data. On paper, it was compliance insurance. In truth, it was survival. I reached out to two people I trusted completely. Ria Tan, a contract lawyer whose calm could slice through panic, and Cal Wolf, the sharpest systems architect I'd ever met. In 72 hours, we built a private sandbox with one guiding law: transparency can't be stolen. We registered it quietly as Helios Ridge LLC, a harmless compliance lab in Colorado, and buried its true core beneath layers of open-source code. Weeks later, while combing through Nexus's internal archive, I found an email buried in an old PR thread. It read, "If needed, we can position Lucas Vale as the architect behind the Mesa recovery narrative." I stared until the letters blurred. They weren't just erasing me. They were overwriting history in real time. That night I stopped waiting for recognition. I didn't quit, didn't shout. I started recording. Dates, edits, signatures, timestamps, every trace they tried to bury. In my cloth-bound journal, under a new heading, Mesa Report, I wrote one line: "Control endures through selective memory. Build a structure where memory can't be rewritten." That note became the first sketch of Helios Ridge, my lifeboat disguised as paperwork. I didn't know it yet, but the city of Mesa wasn't where Lucas made his mistake. It was where I stopped believing family and trust could coexist. By the time my flight to Iron Vale City took off 6 weeks later, Margaret may have believed she'd cut me loose. She had no idea the foundation beneath her empire was already shifting, engineered by the sun she'd tried to erase. The skyline was pulsing when I stepped from the cab. Iron Vale City at 8 in the early morning looked polished and empty. Glass towers, rushing shoes, faces pretending not to see. Above them rose Nexus Tower, 29 floors of mirrored ambition reflecting everything except the people who built it. I walked through the revolving doors as if returning home, though it now felt like entering an occupied zone. The strategy floor smelled of burnt coffee and overworked circuits. My single goal that morning: finalize the Orion Cloud framework deck before our Tri-City rollout. Rainport, Bridgemont, Riverton. It was the largest project in Nexus history. 8 years, $1.6 billion of partnerships, 3 governments involved. I had built every model, every clause. When I opened the shared file, my name should have appeared beside Lead Architect. It didn't. The author metadata read, Lucas Vale. For a full minute, I assumed error, but each slide, the charts, compliance logic, encryption flow, was mine. The only difference was tone. sterile, ironed flat, stripped of humanity. Lucas hadn't rewritten my work. He'd claimed it. I screenshotted the evidence and printed a version with my metadata still intact. Then I walked to the 29th floor, where my mother's office gleamed behind glass paneling facing the riverfront. She didn't look up when I entered. The bronze pen hovered over another report. "Someone changed the author field on the Orion deck," I said. "It lists Lucas." Without pausing, she signed the page. "In this family, what's ours is ours." The weight of that sentence landed harder than anger. She didn't see theft, only inheritance. The Vale name was the company. Individuality was noise. That was the moment I understood the battle wasn't about recognition. It was about authorship. In every photo, she placed herself center. In every success, she wrote the caption. I didn't argue. I nodded, left, and did what I always did. Documented. At my desk, I created 2 new copies, one encrypted, one printed with edit logs. I slipped the printout into a tan legal folder marked personal reference and locked it in my bag. From that day forward, I stopped sharing itineraries. No corporate booking systems, no admin broadcasts. I rebooked flights manually. No one, not even Margaret, would know my next city. A week later came the annual summit Forward Horizon. Gold lights, a crystal flute of champagne, an instrumental ensemble playing corporate classics. I stood near the back as Margaret took the stage. Flawless as ever. Nexus's international expansion will be led by director Lucas Vale. His dedication to our vision defines what this company stands for. Applause roared. My name followed once, Field Operations Lead, a disposable title. I lifted my glass, half smiled, and didn't drink. The real stage was already under construction, and none of them knew I was drawing its plans. Near midnight, as guests drifted toward the exits, my phone buzzed, a private message from an unknown number. They planned to send Lucas to shadow you. Check your itinerary. I looked up. Across the ballroom, Margaret laughed beside a board member, and Lucas stood at her shoulder, a reflection that didn't blink. I slipped out before the next toast. The applause behind me blurred into the hallway hum, and in that hush, I realized my mother had just declared her victory. She didn't know it was the opening move of my escape. In the back seat of the car, I opened my SecureNet tunnel on the slim graphite laptop and generated a new travel code. Only I would know the real route. Rainport came first, but no one could trace when or how. Before closing the lid, I took a screenshot of the Orion deck's title slide. Author Lucas Vale. Beneath it, in my cloth-bound journal, I wrote a single line. That name will fall off the cover, not because I tear it down, but because gravity always finishes the job. Rainport welcomed me with silver skies and drizzle that refused to become rain. The horizon blurred into fog, and the city looked like it was holding its breath. I'd spent 3 years of my early career here, back when I still believed that work alone could shift a family's hierarchy. Summit Link Network's headquarters sat beside Mirror Lake, a cube of glass and steel. The meeting was private, just me and their CTO, Eli Navarro, a man famous for precision and mistrust. Nexus Systems promises a lot, he said, voice clipped. But every rollout ends in delay. Why should I believe this one's different? I placed a folder on the table and opened it to a schematic he hadn't seen before. Layered encryption, adaptive compliance, and a secure framework the Nexus board hadn't approved yet. Eli traced the lines. This isn't standard documentation. No, I said. It's what the standard should look like. He leaned back. Who wrote it? For a moment, the air tightened. I could have lied, said our team or Lucas's group. Instead, I told a cleaner half-truth. Whoever built it doesn't matter, as long as it works. He half-smiled. That's how I know who did. For the first time in months, someone saw merit instead of politics. The meeting stretched into late afternoon. Code reviews, architecture debates, real talk about efficiency over image. Summit Link wasn't buying Nexus's name. they were testing whether I still believed in the work. During a break, a notification flashed on my phone. Admin access alert. User Lucas. File opened. Orion chapter to Rainport, PPTX they were watching. Margaret had authorized it. Lucas was monitoring my progress, maybe preparing to steal another credit. I dismissed the alert and re-entered the room as if nothing had happened. By evening, Eli's team had offered a conditional verbal commitment. As we packed up, he handed me his card. "If Nexus ever stops fitting you," he said, "call me. I invest in people, not logos." I nodded. "I'll remember that." Outside, mist glazed the pavement. The lights along the pier fractured on the wet ground like glass. Back at the hotel, I transferred every project file from Nexus's server to my Secure Vault system and embedded an invisible metadata watermark, proof if they copied me again. When the transfer finished, I stared out toward Mirror Lake where a ferry's lone light cut through the fog. In my journal, I wrote, "When someone finally sees what you can build, that's the moment false power begins to collapse." I closed the book, exhaled, and understood. It was no longer about revenge. It was about the authorship of my own future. Somewhere in that quiet Rainport night, the line between survival and rebellion disappeared. 2 days later, I landed in Bridgemont under a low gray sky that smelled of salt and snow. The air felt clipped, decisive, like Karen Holt, Eastline Communications General Counsel, waiting for me. Their headquarters rose along Harrow Creek, all tinted glass and mirrored steel, as if the building itself were cross-examining the city. Karen didn't waste time. She slid a printed contract across the table, Nexus's standard draft, and began dissecting it aloud. "This clause violates state data law. This payment term's unenforceable. Liabilities 3 revisions behind." Each word landed like a cut. I kept steady. "We can pause the process and review internally," I offered. She leaned back. "I prefer partners who make changes, not ones who need permission." The meeting ended without a handshake. That night, in a small apartment overlooking the frozen water, I opened my private archive and scrolled to a document labeled Lean Contract, a framework Ria Tan had helped me design months earlier. Faster, cleaner, built for flexibility. I revised it through the night, line by line, adjusting each clause to Eastline's jurisdiction. By dawn, I sent it directly to Karen's secure inbox with a note. "This version works in practice, not just policy." By noon, she called me back. Her tone had changed. "You wrote this for Nexus," she said slowly. "They're just not ready to use it yet." After a pause, she signed the temporary agreement. "If they don't use you right," she added, "someone else will." It wasn't flattery, it was recognition. Minutes later, my phone vibrated. Margaret Vale. I stepped into the hallway before answering. Her voice was frosted, each syllable lined with restraint. Why was the Eastline contract altered outside of protocol? "Lucas will take over Bridgemont from here." The call ended before I could reply. I stood by the window, the city reflected in the glass like a question. She still believed she could overwrite me with silence. She didn't see that silence had already switched sides. There it was, the quiet execution order. I wasn't being questioned. I was being replaced. After Margaret's call, I walked back into the meeting room, gathered my papers, and thanked Karen Holt for her time. She didn't ask what happened, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. That evening, as I checked out, the hotel clerk handed me a sealed envelope. "A woman left this for you." Inside was a printed copy of the Lean contract. My version, the one that worked. At the bottom, 6 words were written in pencil. "Use this when you're free to." The initials KH curved at the edge. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the tan legal folder that already held the proof of authorship for Orion Cloud Framework. Outside, fine snow drifted across Bridgemont, melting as it touched my coat. In the car to the airport, I replayed the week in fragments: Rainport, Bridgemont, and the unspoken war beneath it all. Each city had drawn a line, and somewhere along that line, I was carving a path straight through my mother's control. By the time the plane rose through the storm, I wasn't thinking about being erased anymore. I was thinking about permanence. Riverton, the last stop. The air smelled of cedar and sun-baked stone even in winter, and the light turned everything gold, as if endings could pretend to be peaceful. I landed late in the day with 2 sealed deals, Rainport and Bridgemont, and one final meeting that could anchor everything. A 4-hour negotiation with Nathan Crow, Chief Executive Officer of Skyfront Fiber Solutions. Nathan was broad-shouldered, pragmatic, and allergic to corporate theater. He didn't waste a minute. "If Nexus Systems replaces you halfway through," he asked, "who guarantees the rest of this contract?" I didn't flinch. If I'm gone, it means they've pulled the bridge out from under the cash flow. "You'll know where to find me." He stared for a moment, then nodded, the kind of nod that weighed more than ink. The meeting ran steady. By the time I left the conference hall, I'd convinced him of everything but one truth, that I'd still be standing when the ink dried. At the end of the corridor, a receptionist stopped me. "Mr. Vale," she said, "someone from Nexus just sent over a revised proposal for Mr. Crow, marked latest version." I froze. I knew exactly what that meant. In the lobby, I opened my slim graphite laptop and pulled up the file. Identical layout, identical figures, but the metadata bore a new signature. Author, Lucas Vale. Near the footer, faint and nearly invisible, was my own watermark, AVRV. They'd stolen the same document again, repackaged it, and called it theirs. I walked straight back into Nathan's office. "There's something you need to see." I handed him 2 contracts, their version and mine, and pointed to the watermark. "If you ever see this," I said quietly, "it's the original. Anything without it is counterfeit." Nathan looked down, caught the mark, and gave a low, knowing laugh. They just shot themselves in the foot. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to defend. That night, as my plane lifted above Riverton, the sky turned black and molten gold. My phone buzzed. "Access revoked. Nexus Global Network." Then a second notification from Margaret Vale. "Subject, your role is concluded. Do not contact any client. She'd done it." The final cut. Silent, surgical, complete. I sat motionless as the cabin roared. To the others on board, I was just another man staring at his screen. No one knew the woman who had just fired me midair was my mother. But what I felt wasn't rage. It was released. The kind that comes when the noise finally stops. I reached into my bag and opened the offline network, Helios Ridge, the system I'd built for this very moment. Inside it lived everything. Every clause, note, schematic, and legal framework tied to Orion Cloud, and beyond data, it held something rarer. The trust of 3 clients who had seen me, not the company deliver. I drafted 3 short messages. Each had the same subject line, access unlocked. AV, then I pressed send. For 25 minutes, nothing. Then, one by one, received, received, received. 3 acknowledgments. No questions. No hesitation. Outside the window, the clouds split into bands of violet and flame. I leaned back, the hum of the cabin merging with my pulse. They thought they'd erased me midair. That cutting me off meant cutting me out. But all they'd done was hand me the silence I needed to rebuild. As the plane steadied above the clouds, I whispered to the empty cabin. They thought grounding me would end my flight. The cabin indicator blinked overhead, steady and soft, as if the world had just confirmed it heard me. And somewhere between Riverton and the horizon, Adrian Vale began again, Iron Vale City, next dawn. The streets trembled with horns and footsteps, the rhythm of ambition. I stepped out of the terminal with one carry-on. No ID, no badge. Nexus Tower shimmered across the avenue like a monument to someone else's legacy. My mother's legacy. When my access card flashed red at the gate, I didn't try again. I stood there for a moment, watching my reflection fade against the glass. Then I turned toward the Eastbridge River and walked away. The hotel hadn't changed since my years on Project Overnights. same chipped walls, same worn carpet. I set my bag down, powered on the personal work terminal, and entered the encryption key. The Helios Ridge portal flickered alive. 3 folders appeared, blinking softly: Summit Link Networks, Eastline Communications, Skyfront Fiber Solutions. In each chat window, I began typing the same message. Phase 1 begins now. Access unlocked. Within 4 minutes, 3 confirmations appeared on my screen. That was all it took for Helios Ridge to move from plan to reality. Silence was no longer punishment. It was my operating frequency. Phase 1. At Nexus Systems, Margaret Vale called an emergency board meeting. Lucas tried to reach the clients, but every message bounced back. Their domain was already blocked by the very security framework I had written for them, now rewired under my control. Phase 2. Eastline Communications issued a formal pause on contact, citing internal realignment. According to Ria Tan's encrypted update, Margaret's voice wavered for the first time in 10 years. She accused me of interference. Phase 3. Dataline Chronicle ran the headline: Fairbend-based Helios Ridge LLC in talks with major telecom firms for multi-region cloud deployment. No mention of Nexus, but the timing spoke for itself. The markets moved. Phase 4. On a secure call with Ria, Cal Wolf, and Eli Navarro, we confirmed all 3 clients had signed preliminary test agreements. Escrow funds were processed. 3 steady voices on 1 silent network. A future forming beneath their radar. Phase 5. A text from a blocked number appeared. They're planning to sue you for data theft. I replied, no one can sue the author of the original code. Phase 6. Investors withdrew from Nexus. Lucas's system access was revoked. Margaret's statement blamed a rogue developer. Irony didn't need my commentary. 3 days later, I sent the official release. Helios Ridge LLC confirms a $1.6 billion 8-year partnership with Summit Link Networks, Eastline Communications, and Skyfront Fiber Solutions to deliver adaptive, modular cloud systems across multiple regions. 1 signature appeared beneath it: Adrian Vale, Chief Architect and Founder. 30 minutes later, the digital world ignited. Headlines asked, who is Helios Ridge? What happened to Nexus? That afternoon, Margaret appeared on Global Business Network, poised but unsettled. Nexus will clarify this misunderstanding, she said, smiling without warmth. I made no statement. The next morning, our partners released a joint note. We choose to work with the person who understands the system, not the one who supervises it. No names needed. The world understood. That evening, my phone rang. Her voice came through steady but low. You did this out of spite. No, I said. I just returned what you taught me. How to lead without noise. Silence followed, not heavy but clean. I stepped onto the balcony as Ironvale City dimmed beneath an amber sky. 3 confirmation emails glowed in my inbox like quiet stars. They wanted me weeping on a plane, I whispered. Now they're drowning where they stand. The papers called it the quiet coup. I called it balance. 5 weeks later, under the bright lights of Silvergate, the World Innovation Conference opened. The air inside the convention arena felt manufactured, like everything there existed to sell perfection. Nexus Systems' booth glimmered near the main stage, promising new global alliances. I attended as an independent guest. My name was nowhere on the list, but the organizers knew. Truth always finds its way to the mic. When I entered, Margaret was already speaking. Lucas stood a step behind her, his smile trained for cameras. Nexus remains committed to integrity and innovation, she declared. The words fell flat like recycled air. I waited for the applause to fade, then walked forward. No spotlight, just footsteps on carpet and 100 heads turning toward the man who shouldn't have been there. At the central table, I placed a printed document before the board. This is the current infrastructure map. The Helios Ridge logo shone at the top. Margaret went pale. "What are you doing here?" "Finishing what you never understood." The moderator looked between two binders, Nexus's and mine. "Which version is live?" I opened both. "This one," I said, pointing to mine. "Theirs is 6 weeks out of date." A projection file appeared on the screen, activating Helios Ridge's verification protocol. Within seconds, metadata showed that Nexus's document had been exported from Lucas's account. The room fell silent. Lucas froze. Margaret lowered her gaze. Behind them, live dashboards from Summit Link, East Line, and Skyfront lit up, all running under Helios Ridge contracts. The moderator cleared his throat. "We'll proceed with the team demonstrating operational control. Decision: immediate. Helios Ridge, official partner. Nexus, disqualified." I closed my binder. "One condition," I said softly. "We don't partner with anyone still on Nexus's executive board." No one objected. Margaret gathered her papers and left. Lucas followed. The applause that rose wasn't for me. It was for truth finally visible. A week later, financial feeds reported Lucas Vale resigns from Nexus Systems. Margaret Vale removed as Chief Executive Officer. Nexus assets acquired by private equity. I issued no statement. None was needed. Back in Fairbend, our new Helios Ridge headquarters opened quietly inside a refurbished warehouse. Morning light slid through the windows and touched the steel nameplate by the door. Helios Ridge, founded by Adrian Vale. I ran a hand over the letters. Years ago, my name had been deleted from every project file. Now it was etched into metal. Permanent. Inside, 3 miniature cedar plants lined the table. Gifts from our partners. Each shaped differently, rooted the same way. For the first time in years, I didn't feel victory. I felt equilibrium. "They fired me mid-flight," I murmured. "They thought altitude would bury my name. But up there, between the clouds and the noise, I found the horizon. Some wars end in fire. Mine ended in stillness, because sometimes it takes time, clarity, and a long silence for the world to finally listen. I used to believe power was volume, that the louder you defend yourself, the more you're heard. But in that Silvergate Hall, watching a false empire collapse, I learned something simpler. Power lives in precision, in patience, in silence that cannot be misread. For years, I chased validation inside glass towers, waiting to hear, "You belong here." It took being erased to realize I didn't need permission to exist in a story I had authored. When my mother cut me off mid-air, she thought she was ending everything. Instead, she set me free. Legacy isn't inherited. It's written. Love without respect rots into control. Silence, when chosen, is strategy. Now, when I walk through the Fairbend office, I don't see titles or ranks, only people who believe in clarity and earning every line of their name. Sometimes I still wake half expecting another message saying my role is concluded. I smile, because no one gets to decide that for me again. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or written out of your own work, let this be proof that you matter. Sometimes being locked out means it's time to build your own door. If you believe in reclaiming your voice and your silence, tap subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Every story I share is evidence that resilience doesn't have to shout to be heard. My name is Adrian Vale.